Go ahead.
All right. Well, welcome. Hello, everyone online. It's great to be here today. It's our pleasure. I come from a military family, and I'm intimately aware of the work that the Military Family Resource Centers do in our communities, and I'm most grateful for everything that you do to support our service members, their families, and their children, making resilient communities. So thank you for the opportunity to share with you today. Second slide, please. Today we're going to provide you with a very brief overview of evidence matters. We'll touch base on the definition of health evidence. We'll provide a quick introduction to CADTH. We'll share some information about evidence processes, and we'll discuss the difference between knowledge and evidence. We hope that this presentation today will give you a basic foundation to prompt some discussion and enhance awareness around evidence-based practices. Particularly, what is an evidence-based practice and what is not, and how implementing evidence into practice supports improved outcomes and the other benefits that come with evidence-based practice. I appreciate that some of what we will be speaking here today may be new to some folks, but also at the same time it may be familiar to others. So this is a fairly generic, high-level conversation, but it's a starting point for us to share our perspectives and discuss how we use evidence in practice. Next slide, please. So when we speak of evidence, what do we really mean? And it's important to have clarity around what is evidence. And we've provided a very generic description here to begin our discussion, one we felt that encompassed a variety of evidence and the possible interpretations. So the following definition is something presented in support of truth or an accuracy of a claim. So the term evidence-based practice infers that there is evidence included in the process of care, but simply providing evidence or stating that a particular service is evidence-based doesn't make it so. As the saying, saying so doesn't make it so. So conversations around approaches to evidence-based practice began in the 1970s with a fellow out of the UK named Archie Cochrane, he was an epidemiologist who looked at patient care and he measured outcomes, comparing patients who received care that was based on evidence to patients who received care from programs based on past practices, or simply, we've always done it this way, so this is the way we're going to do it. And what Dr. Cochrane found was that patients who had interventions that were evidence-based had better outcomes, and the cost of their care was reduced. So, this comes to no surprise to us today, but back then, Dr. Cochrane had established a foundation for evidence-based practices. And you might have heard of the Cochrane Collaboration, and this was an organization that formed as a result, and it was to organize medical research information in a systematic way to be able to actually utilize it in practice. So today in Canada, we have high expectations for organizations to incorporate evidence into healthcare decisions. And CADTH, among others, continues with this work and with a focus on how to improve evidence-based practices. Next slide, please. So again, when we speak of evidence-based practices, we look at different types of evidence to provide some form of confirmation or corroboration or substantiation or even validation to the topics that we're focused on. And to cultivate evidence, we usually observe or we gather, we question, we test, and we validate, again, that information. Evidence can be irrefutable, such as the earth is round, that's a fact. Questionable, such as an eyewitness testimony. These things, can be quite subjective, or just plain wrong. But there's key pieces of information that constitute evidence-based practices. And these are classic evidence such as systematic reviews, randomized control trials, case studies, cohort studies, and this also includes best practice guidelines. These are the documents that support improved practice. And we'll speak more to these in detail later. So additionally, can you still hear me well? I'm coming across clear?
Actually, people are saying they can't hear you very well.
Okay. All right. How about, is it better now?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Okay, thank you. Additionally, there's other pieces of evidence, or what we call contextual or internal evidence, such as the context in which a program is situated, the quality measures and the outcomes that are considered important when you're doing a program, as well as the expertise of clinicians who provide the service is also very important and a piece of the evidence-based practice. And last, but certainly not least, is patient or client evidence in the form of patient preferences or values, the needs that we need to consider in the process of creating evidence-based practice. And by incorporating and linking these factors, the classic evidence with contextual or internal evidence, and taking into account patient and client preference, the stage is set for evidence-based practice. And including these three keys will improve and strengthen your practice. Next slide. So we use health evidence in many ways. It's, identifying needs clearly is very important, as well as to inform care plans for our clients. We use evidence to measure and evaluate outcomes and performance. And evidence is used at all levels within the system, from macro to the federal government to municipal, and it informs both policy and practice. Hospitals, of course, community nursing stations, doctors, nurses, allied health, and patients now are using evidence. We live in an age of information, and our clients come to us with evidence in hand, and there's high expectations that we will reciprocate. Next slide, please. So why does health evidence matter? Well, it identifies the most effective treatments, supports the use of judicious care, and judicious use of our resource dollars, and it can identify and prevent harm. It identifies the most effective treatments. It can improve care and provide better outcomes. Often this is quite a focus about reducing the cost of care, but along with that comes the ability to streamline and standardize care, reducing the variability of care that's provided due to geographic location. And there's work that's done around, using evidence-based practice. There is an increased satisfaction among clinicians, and there's some research that this helps to sort of maintain your staffing levels as well. But, health evidence matters because, it meeting the expectations of Canadians. Again, in today's information world, people are more aware of the evidence, and they have very high expectations for evidence-based programming. Next slide, please. So CADTH is here to help meet the expectations of health evidence in Canada. Our role is to provide impartial, evidence-based research and advice on drugs, devices, procedures, and programs that are used within the system. I remember when I was working at the front line, and I would often ponder an issue and think, God, there's got to be someone somewhere thinking of this. And yeah, and there is. CADTH is there to help, but we need to hear from folks such as yourself at the front lines. What are your issues? What do you need evidence for? And at CADTH, we have about 175 people. This includes about 45 health researchers, 15 librarians. We have health economists. We have quite a menagerie of expertise. And the folks at CADTH work hard to develop tools to support the use of evidence in practice, and we work in collaboration and partner with a variety of other stakeholders. And we also work as a knowledge broker, sharing information among, in between other organizations to, again, help practice or help share best practices and promote evidence use. And yeah, so next slide, please. CADTH, we originally started about 28 years ago, and it was an original pilot project, and it's continuing to go. So I think it was quite successful. The deputy ministers of health at that time wanted a coordinated approach to evaluating technologies across the country to ensure that all Canadians were benefiting from the advances made in healthcare technology. And how we do that is we gather, we synthesize, and we assess all the relevant information and evidence. We provide clear and unbiased conclusions and recommendations. And we also create tools to help decision makers be able to use this evidence actually in practice. One of our outreach services is the CADTH liaison officers, which Jeanette and myself are part of. And we're CADTH's physical presence in the local health system. So we're the hands and feet, and like I like to say, the hearts and eyes on the ground. And we're there to help determine the local evidence needs and to provide support to build capacity around the use of evidence. And there's a need for health evidence. I mean, it's growing rapidly. 50% of all of our diagnostics and treatment methods that we use today in healthcare did not exist 10 years ago. And we have more options in healthcare than we ever have, and that comes with a need for more information and solid evidence. In Canada, right now, there's about 22,000 drugs available and over 68,000 devices. And each year, there's over anywhere between 2,000 and 4,000 licenses for new healthcare technology. And that's a lot of evidence to process. Next slide, please.
Lisa, I think we're actually one slide ahead.
Okay.
So
which slide are you on?
Maybe if we can go back to number 9. There we go.
Okay, perfect. There should be the slide that says medical dental health technologies.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, right.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So when we speak about health technologies, we're including medical and dental devices as well as diagnostics. So that's equipment that we use. So anything such as, lab tests, point of care testing. It also includes drugs, prescription drugs, over-the-counter drugs, as well devices from thermometers to CT scanners, and last but not least, procedures and programs. And this includes mental health, such as cognitive behavioral therapy, addiction services, or just to name a few. Next slide, please. But CADTH's area of expertise is actually health technology assessment, or what we call HTA for short. What is HTA? Well, it helps to gather information, and it provides HTA looks specifically at the clinical cost effectiveness of a particular drug or device, and this also includes the harms, the risks, the benefits, the patient preferences, the ethical and the social implications of a particular technology.
Yeah.
Health technology assessment is a multidisciplinary field of policy analysis that examines the medical, economic, social, and ethical implications of a specific technology. Next slide, please. CADTH supports the different jurisdictions in a number of ways with a variety of services and products. Can you still hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. So I'll just go through a few examples. Some of you may have heard of the CADTH Common Drug Review. What this is the national process that CADTH conducts looking at all the drugs that enter into Canada that are listed on the different formularies. Now, the formularies are the list of drugs that each province covers under public services or their drug plans. We provide recommendations for participating publicly funded drug plans on which drugs have incremental benefits that they suggest be listed. The other services that we also provide, or the other products, would be drug therapeutic class reviews. And what this is we look at drugs within a certain class. For example, all the drugs that would be used to treat, say, multiple sclerosis or rheumatoid arthritis or even diabetes. And we would look to see, of the class of drugs, which is the most clinical and cost-effective of all these drugs for consideration. But our most popular product is actually our rapid response assessments. These are typically requested as a response to reacting to a decision problem. And you know, specifically, we will identify whether it's a cost focus or a clinical effectiveness focus, safety, perhaps, or just guidelines for use. And these reports provide a summary of the current evidence on a particular topic. However, there's a limited synthesis of information, as a decision will be made with or without evidence, but a review of the most current evidence is warranted for due diligence. So, like I said, these are our most popular reports, and the liaison officers on the ground are there to assist in making these rapid responses even more easier to receive. Some of the other products that we produce are environmental and horizon scans, and those, so an environmental scan would look across the country to see what other practices are happening. And a horizon scan looks at what's coming down the pipes, what's new, and what's a game changer when it comes to technology. As well, we offer education and support, such as what we're providing today. And we design all these products hopefully be as reliable and practical and accessible for folks like yourself on the front lines. And they're intended to be able to support the appropriate use and effective use of programs and or technology, and to deliver quality care and, you know, add value to your, you know, your programs. And as we move forward in CADTH, you know, as our systems continue to emerge, CADTH also continues to evolve, and we do so with feedback from our customers who are working in the real world and trying to implement evidence into practice. And we recognize that sometimes there's gaps in between what is reality and what we can find in the evidence. So I will switch over to Jeanette at this point.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So, Gata, if you can give us the next slide. Lisa has given you an introduction, a little bit of an introduction to evidence concepts, and she's shared with you a little bit about CADTH at a very high level, but I'm going to dig down into a few specifics that might help you understand a little better, clarify some issues for you. So health evidence comes from the field of health science, and health science is very, very different from pure science. Pure science is looking at the natural world, things like chemistry, biology, geology, and principles in pure science are very often very straightforward. If you bond two hydrogen atoms to one oxygen atom, you will always get water. Newton's laws of motion are laws. You know, an object in motion will remain in motion unless acted upon by an unequal force. But when it comes to health science, there's one very, very clear difference that influences the field completely, and that's the fact that health science is about human beings. And we are all different. Our bodies react individually to drugs. A drug that will cure one person of a condition may not cure another person. As practitioners, especially in the area of mental health interventions or counseling, each of us brings our own personality to the field. And so a patient may react very well to your care, to your personality, or they may not. They may think, I don't really relate to you very well. And also, because we're delivering care as human beings, we do things differently from one another. No two dentists are going to hold their instruments in exactly the same manner. No two psychologists are going to deliver cognitive behavioral therapy in exactly the same way. And so because we're human and because we have all of these variables, health science is incredibly challenging and complex. We often don't come up with straight answers. We often come up with answers that are good for one group of people and not good for another people, and that's simply the reality that we deal with. Next slide. So when we're looking at evidence, here are a few Canadian examples that I pulled out to show you the different types. There are many, many different types of evidence, many different types of studies, and each one of these types of evidence comes with a purpose. There are many versions because there are many reasons. So over on the left-hand side, we see an article called Social Media Interventions for Diet and Exercise Behaviors. And from University of Alberta, clinicians wanted to know if social media interventions encourage people to exercise and practice healthy dietary habits. And what they hoped that they would find was how this helped people's health. How did this improve people's health if they were using social media intervention? So they collected all the research they could find from around the world and were very disappointed to find out that what the studies reported on was not whether in fact social media made people better, but simply whether or not people used social media. Did they tap into some social media platform that talked about diet or exercise? So this was a well-done report, but the outcomes were impossible to use because there really wasn't anything that told us whether or not these things made people better. Up in the top right, we have data, and data is another form of research. The CADTH, the Canadian Institute for Health Information, collects tons and tons of data, and this was looking at why people in hospitals had adverse drug reactions and then were hospitalized. So the information is very valuable, but it's based strictly on numbers and can very much inform healthcare. At the bottom, we have what's called a qualitative research study. So the top two studies are quantitative. They measure numbers. You can count how many people have adverse drug reactions. You can count how many people respond to social media interventions. But qualitative research is very valuable evidence because it tells us what people think, what they experience, what they want to see happen differently. It's based on conversations with people and people's opinions and ideas. And this particular study was trying to find out why men might return to work more quickly than women if they following a workplace accident. And so very valuable information and that in that particular study. Okay, next slide, please. So here are some of the types of studies that we often see quoted in health research. The third box, in the left-hand column, third box from the top, is the randomized control trial. And some people say this is the most valuable piece of information that we have, the most solid evidence. It's pretty darn good. But up above it, we have systematic reviews and meta-analyses. And these are actually studies where, rather than just looking at one group of people and doing one study, systematic reviews collect all the evidence from all across the world that we can find that have addressed the same issue and compile the numbers into a single report so that we can more clearly judge the truth that might run down the center of that information. Because a study conducted in Germany, the patient population may be very different from the patient population in Munich or California. And so it's helpful to have similar studies done in different places around the world so that we can find out what might be applicable to our particular context. And as Lisa mentioned, up above that, we have health technology assessments, which include much more than just clinical effectiveness of a drug or an intervention. We also look at all the other contextual factors. Some people say that the evidence listed down lower on this column is not really all that solid or valuable. But this is actually false. These studies have incredible value, and I want to just point you to a cohort study called the Framingham study. So back in 1948, researchers in Framingham, Massachusetts recruited more than 5,000 people between the ages of 30 and 62, and they, every 2 years since 1948, have gone back to Framingham, and they've asked these people about their lifestyle, and they've done a health check on these people every 2 years, and just to see how lifestyle and health relate. And the Framingham study, first of all, led us to identify all of the major risks for cardiovascular diseases. So high blood pressure, high cholesterol, smoking, obesity, and diabetes and physical activity. All of these lead to cardiovascular disease, and we wouldn't have such solid evidence if it weren't for the Framingham study. Fortunately, the Framingham study is still ongoing. In 1971, they enrolled the children of the original participants. So they had another 5,000 people. And in the 1990s, they enrolled Generation 3. And where's the value in this? Well, probably to track genetic information from family to family to see if where that plays a role in our health. So all types of evidence are helpful. Expert opinion is helpful when there is nothing, when information hasn't been validated. Next slide, please. So I'm going to run a little bit through the evidence process. And evidence starts with a good question, whether people are doing those randomized control trials or whether you, as users of evidence, are asking CADTH to look into a topic for you. And this is just a little quote from Albert Einstein, and I subscribe to him. Nobody's ever sure that he said it, but if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend the first 55 minutes figuring out what the question is. Next slide. So fortunately for us, there's a very easy way to generate a valuable question, and this is called the PICO framework. And the acronym stands for patient population, the intervention, the comparator, the outcomes. Those are the 4 important ones. Sometimes time is important, and sometimes study design is important. So let me just give you an example of walking through a PICO. Say you were interested in finding out whether or not dental appliances helped people with obstructive sleep apnea. Were these actually effective interventions? So your patient population is adults with obstructive sleep apnea. Your intervention is oral appliances. Your comparator could be something like positive airway pressure devices, so the CPAP machine. The outcomes that you're looking for are improved sleep, improved health, less somnolence during the day, and there are other measures of health outcomes for obstructive sleep apnea. So this is what you'd be looking for. And so putting that together, defining your population, your intervention, your comparatives, and your outcomes, you can frame a very tidy question, which would probably read something like, what is the clinical effectiveness of oral appliances versus CPAP machines to treat obstructive sleep apnea? And that's a very clear and tidy question. So if you have questions, think about framing this way. What is the effectiveness of cognitive behavioral therapy delivered by telehealth for individuals with mental health challenges? That would be a study. Patient population, adults with mental health challenges, intervention, cognitive behavioral therapy by telehealth, compared with in-person, probably. And the outcomes would be obviously improvements in perhaps depression scores or PTSD scores and some sort of validated measure. Next slide, please. So once you've framed your question, whoops, let's go back one, please. We've skipped two. There we go. So once we've framed the question, the important next step is to search for all of the evidence that's available on a particular topic. If you've ever gone to research rounds at a hospital and heard a clinician speak, and I have on several occasions, I've heard an eminent clinician stand up and say, I believe this, and there's a really good research study that shows why I believe this. I always say to myself, after having lived in the evidence world for a while, I always say to myself, what do the other studies say? Are there other studies, and what do they say? And I also look at the clinician and say, how are you sure? Like, how have you validated that this is a really good study? Is it just that someone's told you that, or that you actually sat down and really examined that study closely? So it's important to look for all of the available evidence, because if you don't, you're missing something. It's like going out and listening to an ad that says that Toyotas are the best cars in the world, and not checking out the latest consumer reports or car manuals to see, are they really the best at this point in time? Maybe you're buying used ones. If I were buying a used car, I'd go online and check out what all of the people were saying about their experience with that vehicle. It makes no different in health. It's wise to have all the information. Next slide. So once we have the evidence and we've assembled it, we need to figure out if we actually believe it, because as John Ioannidis has said, much of what medical researchers conclude in the studies is misleading, exaggerated, or flat out wrong. And the other important thing here is that only a very small percentage of medical research is ever likely to lead to major improvements in clinical outcomes. In other words, there's a lot of information out there that really isn't helpful or is just wrong. And the publisher of Skeptic magazine, his name is Michael Shermer, picked up on this phrase, baloney detection. It was a phrase coined by Carl Sagan, and Michael Shermer kind of liked it, and so he put out what he calls a baloney detection kit. And basically it's just 10 questions that anybody should ask when someone makes a claim, something new and fantastic and wonderful out there. So they make a claim, 10 questions you can ask to see whether or not you should begin to believe this. And it's a helpful and cute little tool, and not it's not wrong. It's a very good starting point for that type of information. But in the world of health evidence, we have a much more scientific way of figuring out whether something is valid or not, and we call that critical appraisal. Next slide, please. So critical appraisal, there are many, many different tools that can be used to critically appraise evidence. There are checklists, questions that we ask when we're reading through scientific or health evidence studies. And the first question, the fundamental question that we're looking for is, can I trust the results? Because there are no perfect studies. There are many reasons why we may not be able to trust the results. Sometimes scientists and health researchers have the best of intentions, but there are limitations to what they've been able to do. So Colonel Rakesh Jetley in our Canadian military did a study of nabalone, which is a medication, a derivative of cannabis, that helps some people with sleep. And he did a very solid study with some of his military colleagues to see if this could help people with PTSD get some sleep. And they tried it in 10 patients, and I believe 9 of the 10 patients found it helpful. Is this substantial evidence that we can go forward with and make policy on? No, and Colonel Jetley in the write-up about this study said this is a beginning, but this needs to be validated by other people in other situations because there are factors that may have influenced their results in being so positive. One of them being that they only had 10 people in that study, and 10 people is extremely small. It's a starting point, but it certainly doesn't solve the answer. So critical appraisal is asking the question, can I trust the results of this study? Who funded the study? You'll usually find that on the last page. It's extremely important because many device manufacturers fund their own studies, and they're pretty positive about those devices, and drug manufacturers the same thing. Sometimes studies, unfortunately, seem to be more marketing tools than actually helpful scientific evidence. If you can trust a study, you then ask yourself, what are the results? Because if you can't trust the study, you might as well toss it away. Why read further? So what are the results? There's where you'll find out how effective something is, how harmful something may be. And only then do you decide, will this actually help me in my decision making? And here we go back to some of the things that Lisa mentioned about the context. Is the study done in a population that's similar to yours, in a location that's similar to yours? And do you have the same kind of health resources available that were available in this particular study? So the next slide, please. And this is just a couple of pages from the textbook that shows you why we critically appraise evidence, because there's so many kinds of biases in studies. There's selection bias. That's when researchers actually choose people who will probably respond really well to a medication. There's ways of figuring that out before you start your study, and that can sway the results. One of our favorite biases on here that we spotted is called hot stuff bias. And hot stuff bias, it means the latest issue of the day, what's hot in the news today. So this is the kind of thing that my colleagues, our colleagues at CADTH do every day. The researchers in our shop are, when you have researchers, you have people with, most of us have a glass half full or a glass half empty, and I always say about my research colleagues that there's nothing in their glass. You have to prove to them that there's something there. They're very skeptical people, and that's a good thing. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about knowledge versus evidence. Next slide. When we go to good old Dr. Google, which is where a lot of people look for information, you're going to find a lot of information on Google. But it's just information, it's knowledge, but is it evidence? Absolutely not. Where do you go on Google to find health evidence? The first thing you should type into that search box is PubMed, P-U-B-M-E-D. It's a database housed in the U.S., and they collect and publish the abstracts from almost all of the highly reliable research journals published in the world. And you go to PubMed and you can type in diabetes, or maybe that's too broad, insulin analogs, and it will pop up with all of the research that's been done on insulin analogs around the world and provide you with the abstract if it's available. So that's a good starting point to find health evidence. Obviously, the CADTH website is an excellent place to find health evidence. And there are other organizations like CADTH in Canada and around the world. We don't always make it into PubMed, but our librarians who search our health research for us do know where to find us. And if you need help searching literature, we can certainly do that for you. The next slide, please. This is some research, that health research that was out there, and this is the early stuff. This is the misleading stuff. So there was a headline in a journal that said, this medicinal toothbrush tree yields an antibiotic to treat TB in a new way. Headlines are terribly misleading. The researcher himself in the article said that he had located extracts that may have antibacterial properties, may have them, and they may be developed as antibiotics. So this is all very, very early and very misleading with information. It's not evidence, and it's a tiny bit of knowledge. Next slide. And then there's the whole clinical knowledge. Clinical knowledge is extremely valuable. It's something that people gain from experience, like perhaps that doctor on the right-hand side. We can learn it through our education. We learn it through textbooks. But the difference between knowledge and evidence is that knowledge is not formally tested. Evidence is the testing of that knowledge. On the right-hand side is an article from PubMed, which I just mentioned. And I put this up here just to show you that even if you go to PubMed and you look at this impressive article, it's not necessarily evidence. This is simply knowledge. The article is about how the fixed temporal mandibular joint disorder, and unfortunately, it's simply a paper that puts forth a reason why someone believes this. But the author strongly believes in this particular practice, and he went and found 170 references to support his work, but he did not systematically review information. He didn't critically appraise information. He's just putting this out there saying, this is what I believe, and this is why. When you actually do the critical appraisal and the validation, which CADTH has done and which the American Dental Association has done, we learn that, in fact, this particular practice as a whole, this particular treatment method, is not founded in evidence. Next slide, please. So what is evidence? I'm going to give a few examples just to fill you in. Next slide. And actually, we're going to skip this one and go to the next one. Here's another example. This is not evidence, but it's a very helpful review article. The clinician who wrote this particular paper wanted to look at emotional freedom techniques for psychological and psychophysiological conditions. And so what she's done is looked around the world to find the definition, to establish a definition for emotional freedom techniques, and talked about all the different definitions that people are using. And she's also gone out and found all the evidence about that currently exists on emotional freedom techniques. But what she did not do here was critically appraise. She simply shares them as information. This is helpful knowledge, but the information is not particularly validated in the article. Next slide, please. Here's a randomized control trial. And when you look at a real study, a real evidence review, or what you'll find is what you see in red under the word summary. You will find a background. The background tells you why somebody is studying something. You will find methods. How did we do this study? How did we recruit our patients? Or how did we find the different types of literature? Where did we search for literature? And the methods should very clearly point out how the study was done. Then they will present the findings of the study and at the conclusion. This is actually the first randomized control trial that was done to see if electronic smoking cessation, or cigarettes were effective for smoking cessation. And it's a fairly well done study, but the author himself very honestly concluded that when he completed his study, he couldn't say that his results were actually valid because he realized at the end he didn't have enough people in the study. I mean, more than 600 people in the study, but he couldn't validate them. However, the news media got a hold of this study, and they said e-cigarettes are 25% more effective and nicotine replacement therapy for stopping smoking, or to help people stop smoking. In a sense, they were right, but on average, 4 out of 100 people were able to quit smoking on nicotine replacement therapy, and 5 people out of 100 were able to stop smoking with the e-cigarettes. So that's a 25% increase, but it's a rather misleading headline. A well-done study, an honest study as far as the conclusions were presented. So that a good study, but not helpful because it wasn't, there weren't enough people in the study to validate the findings. Next slide, please. So here's another study. This one's a systematic review, and so this is where people have posed a question. The question being, what is the evidence that medical marijuana can help people with psychiatric indications? They went out, they searched the world for all the evidence, and they tell us where, and they pulled the data and compiled it all into a single report. But what they found out, if you look at the results at the bottom, if you can see that, it said no RCT, so no randomized control trials. None of those well-designed studies thus far have examined the effectiveness of marijuana for Tourette's, PTSD, or Alzheimer's studies, or Alzheimer's disease. Lower quality studies have examined the effectiveness of marijuana, but none of them are RCT. The title of this is Medical Marijuana for Psychiatric Indications. And when you read the study thoroughly, which Lisa and I and some of our CADTH colleagues did, what we discovered was that they had 13 studies that looked at clinical effectiveness, but of those 13, 11 of them were looking at things like cannabinoids. Now, cannabinoids are not marijuana. They are actually a derivative of one component of marijuana. So you're not consuming or being treated with the entire marijuana family. You're just being treated with one single component of marijuana. But they included them in the systematic review. Only 2 of the studies actually looked at smoked cannabis. So I would say that the authors have misled us to some extent, even with the title. It would have been helpful if they had used medical marijuana because they really only found 2 studies. I'm sure they meant well when they did this study. They were looking to fill a gap in knowledge. What is the medical evidence for marijuana use? But they probably should have stopped when they didn't find any evidence. That's not how they were committed to do this particular piece of work. So they padded it with cannabinoids and other those that are derived from medical marijuana. And the next slide, please. So I've given you a whole lot of problematic research, probably just to reinforce that it's not all trustworthy, that there are problems. But now I want to turn to some evidence that may be extremely useful and extremely well done, very informative. And this is work done by NICE, which is the National Institute for Clinical Evaluation, I believe. It's a UK organization, similar to CADTH. CADTH has 175 people. NICE in the UK has about 10,000 people. The reason they have a more substantial body of people is because they review all evidence for the entire healthcare system in the UK. They make recommendations that people in the UK must follow. They have the power of enforcement, whereas CADTH only has the power of suggestion and recommendation. So they, I believe it was 2010, they put out guidance for treating children with bedwetting. And in 2012, they updated it. This particular review looked at all of the available treatments for bedwetting. It looks at the evidence, it critically appraises the evidence, and it comes up with guidance. This document has a nice little table that says, this is what we recommend for first-line treatment. It appears to be the most clinically effective and the least potentially harmful to the child. And that happens to be alarm. The second treatment option is a medication, but all medications come with side effects, and so it very kindly points out what many of those side effects are. And then it goes down to second line, third line, fourth line. If this doesn't work, then what should you try next? It also tells you how effective these treatments are. Many of them are only 60% effective or less. Actually, I believe it's much less than that, but the 60% is the dropout rate. All of the interventions for bedwetting have fairly high dropout rates. People don't follow through with the treatment, probably for many different reasons. The medications, it may be the side effects, the alarms, it may be the disruption to family life or the response of the child. But high dropout rates, but it tells you that. Side effects, it tells you that. So this type of work is informative, not only to tell you what works, but also to tell you how patients react, also to tell you about what harms you may encounter, so that you can share that, so that clinicians can share that information with their patients and with others. So a well-done study, and something that the type of work that CADTH hopes does put out with its large studies, and that exists around the world. And so, Lisa, I'm going to turn it back to you to wrap us up here.
Thank you, Jeanette. Next slide, Gada. Thank you. So we've touched a bit today on health evidence. We've defined what that is and what that is not, and provided a brief introduction to what CADTH is and what we do. Shared some information around evidence processes and knowledge versus evidence, and Jeanette has kindly provided us with some excellent examples of bias and different types of evidence, and a really great example there of something quite solid from NICE. But before we leave you today, we hope that we're able to inform some of your practices, and that next time that you're facing a decision around programs or the selection of the most appropriate treatment option, or the adoption of a new way or a new approach of doing things in your world, we hope that you would consider coming to CADTH to support your evidence needs. We're a service that's free to the Military Family Resource Center. It's part of our federal mandate, and Jeanette would be the liaison officer that you would connect with. Next slide there, please. You know, what Jeanette would work hard. She would work with you to, identify topics that would be of impact for you, and we would also be providing additional education and support in the future if you're interested in such. We also do what we call a business case boot camp. If you have a particular approach that you'd like to try, and it's a pilot project, or you want to get something off the ground and not quite sure how to do that, we do have workshops that support how to build evidence into a business case. As well, Jeanette had made a comment a couple times throughout our conversation today around critical appraisal, and that is another service we offer, is critical appraisal workshops to actually get down and dirty, if you will, with the evidence and using different kinds of tools, because there's lots of tools out there. So as we come to the end of our presentation, I just want to share with you, this is a piece of evidence that we have done before, and it's just an example of a PICO question that's been quite defined, and you know, it was something that we thought would align with some of what the work that you are doing. So we are really interested to hear from you around, you know, today's presentation helpful? Was there information that you still would like to learn? And in the future, if there's any other topics that may be of interest to you, today's presentation was just a very quick overview of what evidence is, and we've just really touched the surface, and certainly welcome the opportunity to dive in deeper with you, and encourage you to please don't ever hesitate to connect with Jeanette or myself, and we'll open up. Next slide, please. Again, this is just our contact information for both Jeanette and myself, and next slide. And you can follow CADTH on a variety of social media platforms as well if you're interested, but please, again, don't hesitate to connect, and if you have any questions today, we would love to hear them. Thank you.